like to introduce the third speaker of today, Pete Chen. Pete is the Chief Innovative Advocate at Tudor Reilly Health, a digital health communications agency specializing in patient-centric experience and knowledge shared online. His team uses advanced online tools to help accelerate clinical trial recruitment, particularly in hard-to-recruit therapeutic indications. Pete started his career as a journalist for the pharmaceutical industry, and over time has become a strong advocate of research into rare diseases. Welcome, Pete.
Okay, thanks for that introduction, Flora, and thanks for inviting me to speak. So my presentation is all about using the online approach to identify rare disease patients, and also people who are interested in rare diseases in general. And as Flora mentioned, our expertise is around helping companies recruit patients for clinical trials. But I would say that the techniques are applicable to identifying patients in general too. So just to start with some scene setting about why the online communication is so important. And this chart is showing the volume of online content which is created and shared going back over a decade. And you know, it's no surprise it's going up. It's going up in an exponential fashion. But there are two things that I like about this chart. One is if you look at the vertical axis, the terminology is new. There's a zettabyte. I had no idea what that meant before I started to use this chart, but apparently a zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabytes, so that's a lot. And actually the pace of growth is quite staggering. So in the 5 years to 2011, that volume of data increased 9 or 10 times, and it's due to reach 8 zettabytes this year. So if you're wondering how much data that is, think about the US Library of Congress. That's got a lot of digital data. You multiply that 18 million times, and that's that figure for this year. Okay, so this chart here is from a study which was published in summer of 2013. So it's the most recent of its kind. And it was a study done by a group in the US called SysGrid, which is affiliated with Tufts University. And they went out to, they reached out to over 5,500 patients in about 20-30 countries. And these were people who had taken part in clinical trials in the past. And the point of it was to understand their experience and perceptions of clinical trials, and they asked them a whole bunch of questions, including, if you have taken part in a clinical trial, how did you find out about it? And what you can see along the x-axis is all the possible channels through which they might find out about clinical trials. So it includes things like the doctors, the internet, email, pharmacists and family. And in the dark green columns you can see this is the preferred, this is where they would prefer to get information about clinical trials. And in the light green columns you can see where they actually got that information. And there's a bit of a mismatch. So if you look at the biggest dark green columns, they represent primary and secondary care physicians. So people would logically like to get that information from their doctors. But if you look at the green columns under those two categories, they're actually quite small. 20% of people get information from their doctors. But then you look at the largest light green column, and it's around the middle, and that's the internet. So almost half of people who responded got information about a trial from the internet. And the last time that such a big study was done, about 10 years ago, that figure was about 25%. So it's quite a huge surge in the past 10 years. And what this shows is that we've reached a key tipping point in the sense that for the first time, the internet has become the #1 source of information about clinical trials. And that just kind of sets the scene. From our view, it just underlines the potential to reach out to people who might take part in trials doing this online. And I would argue that in the rare disease space, this is even more compelling because traditionally there have not been lots of information sources that people could rely on. Whereas now, if you can provide that information in an appropriate way and which is authentic, you can actually reach out to other people. So, just a bit of the theory. This is how we do it in our organisation, and it's a 3-level approach. See, inverted pyramid, or you can call it funnel. At the top of this top layer is all about disease awareness. So when you create information online, you never go in straight about the clinical trial because people in general have quite poor awareness of trial is what they read in the media. So rather than going straight in at that point, you tap into people's appetite for health information in general. So people would never, in the main, Google for a clinical trial, but they would Google a symptom that they experience, or a drug that they've been prescribed, or a medical terminology that they've heard somewhere. And that's the point of this first layer. You get their attention through what we call a disease awareness website. Once you've got that, and once you've built that context, then you can start to tell them about a clinical trial. And you do that by connecting one website to another website. And that's the middle layer. This is a website that's created solely to inform people about one clinical study. And if you're going to do this correctly, one of the most important parts of this clinical trial website is a dedicated questionnaire, which people can then complete to, it's 5 or 6 questions, which is a bit like a pre-screener, and it allows people to just answer 5 or 6 questions. And that information then goes off to a clinical trial centre, which is closest to where they live. And that's the approach, and we've tried it, we've implemented it 3 or 4 times now, and we've shown that it's robust, and it works across, regardless of any disease area. We've done it in common diseases and rare diseases. The principle applies. So that's the theory. What does it look like in practice? And I'll give you a case study. And I know that this is not a rare condition, but the principle applies equally. This is a disease awareness website. So it's the top layer of the pyramid, funnel, sorry. And it was done for a pharmaceutical company in what is called prodromal or early Alzheimer's. So it's a type of Alzheimer's which is before the most common symptoms manifest, and so it's generally poorly understood. So we created this website for them. What we always say to pharmaceutical companies is that when you do something like this, you've got to speak in the language of the patients. There's no point speaking in the typical jargon of a company. And that's always a bit of a revelation for them. I probably don't have to say it to you guys because you're in a much better, more informed space than they are. What you can see in the top right corner is what we call an ad or a visual link, which would then click through to the clinical trial website. So this is the second layer of the funnel. This is what hosts a questionnaire where people, either patients themselves or people who care for them, can then submit information. That then goes off to a clinical trial centre. So if you're thinking about doing something like that, or doing any kind of online outreach websites, Google advertising, these are some of the things that you want to consider. So first of all is just thinking about the legislative landscape. And in this whole new world of new media, the good news is that the rules have not changed. The same requirements apply in terms of providing clinical trial information to patients and carers. So that information, as it always has to be fact-based, and it has to be balanced, and it has to be not unduly influenced by, not unduly influenced. And that stays the same. And last year there was some new legislation published all about how clinical trials are run in Europe, and those rules come into effect next year. And part of that is to harmonise how and simplify how trials take place in Europe. And it's also about encouraging development of drugs for orphan diseases, which is great. There's no actual mention of online clinical trial recruitment within the legislation. So in the absence of that information, what you need to do is to go to the next level, which is to understand, well, what does Google actually allow? And if you've ever spent any time looking at Google's advertising policy, there are 5 or 6 guidelines that govern what is or what is not allowed in terms of Google advertising. And it's a good thing because it protects consumers. So it's things like safety and security and accuracy of information and transparency. And there's a curious paradox here, because if you look at the Google AdWords policy on clinical trial promotion, they say that it's prohibited. It's not allowed on Google AdWords. So if you go no further than that, then you might not actually get beyond first base. But there's actually a mismatch between what Google says at global level and what it actually allows at country level. So if you look at countries like the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and also places like, the last time I checked, Australia and Canada, they do actually allow clinical trial advertising, even though they say it's prohibited at a global level, provided that it meets certain criteria. So in other words, those ads cannot be misleading in any way. They can't give the implication that a drug is safe, and also those ads have to be approved by the relevant authorities, like the ethics committees. So in those countries, that's fine. In other countries where the guidance is not so clear, what we would recommend is that you try it. So you create the ads, you have them approved in the ethics committees in those countries, and then you set up an AdWords. I'm going to talk about AdWords in a second. But you set up an AdWords campaign, and you see what happens. We've done this in many countries, and we've done this without any concerns. You know, if you're going to create any kind of online campaign that is about clinical trials, there's always going to be some risks to bear in mind, and that's fine. You just got to mitigate those risks. So the first point reflects what I just mentioned, the fact that any materials have to be approved by the relevant ethics committees. If you're going to be collecting any kind of sensitive patient identifier data, you've got to have a very clear written data privacy policy on your website. And it's good practice to have a tick box to, so people indicate that they've actually read and understood what that says. And if you're going to have a website that holds patient data, it needs to comply with all the relevant data protection regulations. So in Europe, that's the Data Protection Directive, and in the US, it's something called the Safe Harbor Framework. Okay, so I mentioned AdWords, Google AdWords, and if you're going to be doing some kind of Google advertising campaign, this is the key tool that you will use. And what you want is that people who search Google for a certain keyword or keywords then see your ad either at the top or to the right-hand side of your search results. So key to this is to get your keywords right. And this tool is called Keyword Planner. And it's a really, really useful resource for understanding, well, if I'm interested in this word or these words, what are the related words that might be associated with it? So as kind of experts in the relevant medical disease areas that you're interested in, you might think that you've got everything covered. But I would say that it's worth doing it anyway, just to see if there's anything that you might have missed. Or alternatively, if you've no idea where to start, then that's definitely your first port of call. Okay, once you've got your, in fact I'm going to skip to the next slide quickly. And I just picked out one disease, I picked out cystic fibrosis, and this is what the Google AdWords keyword planner looks like. And if you can see that, down the middle you've got some suggestions about phrases or words that might be connected to cystic fibrosis. So these are the kind of things that you might feed into your keywords campaign. So let me go back. So once you've got this, and you shouldn't take this at face value, by the way, you should apply some common sense to it. But sometimes Google will give you things that are closely related but not quite, or they might not be related, in which case you just need to strike them out. But once you've got the keywords that you think are the right ones, you then go back to this stage here, which is all about match types. And this is around, do you want your ad to appear if the exact phrase that you've chosen appears, or will you allow it to appear when closely related terms are typed into Google? And there are three categories of match types to bear in mind. First of all is the exact phrase. So it might be cystic fibrosis is the one. And that would not pick up, for example, fibrosis cystic, because it's the wrong order. Alternatively, you might go for a phrase match, which is two or more words in a certain order with nothing in between. So you might go for cystic fibrosis treatment, but if somebody types in cystic fibrosis new treatment, that would not, your ad would not appear. The third category is called broad matching, and this allows for different orders of keywords and also for Google's assumptions about keywords that are related. It's useful, but in the rare disease area, where you want your ads to be quite specific, it's probably not the best tool to use, because Google is pretty sophisticated, but it's not quite an expert in rare diseases yet. So we would argue that you should make your phrases as exact as you can. Okay, so when it comes to actually planning and implementing a campaign, so for example, if you look at this, what do you do with it? Well, the ideal combination is that you get keywords that have high search volume, which is the second column from the right, and ideally low competition, which is the first one on the right. This means that lots of people are searching, but you've got relatively little competition, so that's quite a sweet spot. So there's some in there, for example, let's see. So what is cystic fibrosis? It has very high search volume and low competition, and likewise, cystic fibrosis life expectancy has 4,500 monthly searches and low competition. So these are good keywords to go for. So these are the companies that you would want to implement. But once you set up a campaign, it doesn't, your work doesn't end there. You want to constantly, regularly monitor, how your campaign is going. And AdWords it provides a tool called it provides a matrix called the click-through rate, which basically looks at the number of views that an ad has attracted, and as a percentage of that total, how many people have clicked on it. And it's a bit like a voting system. So the more people that click on your ad, the better the quality that Google interprets that ad to be. And the reward is that the ad actually appears in more prominent positions, and that's a good thing. So really, you want to be achieving the highest click-through rate possible, and the way you do that is by writing the ad in the most appropriate way, by matching it with your audience as closely as possible. And cost management, right? So obviously, advertising has the potential to be expensive if you don't control it. The good thing is that with Google AdWords, you can set a cap on how much you're spending. So your cap might be £200 a month or £100 a month. So no matter how many clicks you get, your spend will never go above that amount. That's useful if your budget's limited. And likewise, Google offers grants to non-profit groups, which can go a long way if you've got limited budgets. Maybe. Right, so if you're going to advertise on Google, what would you do? Would you advertise globally, or would you be a bit more selective? I would argue that you should be selective, otherwise it's quite wasteful of your budget. And in terms of geolocating your ads, Google is very, very sophisticated. So on the left-hand side, you've got a little snapshot of New York City. And in the US, you can actually limit your ads to appear within, right down to a certain zip code only. And that's what that red dashed area represents. And your ad would not appear anywhere outside of that zip code. That's how specific you can get in the US. That's the only country currently where you can do that kind of zip code or postcode targeting. But in any country, for example, this on the right side you've got Germany, you can pick one location, for example, Göttingen, and set a radius around that city within which you want your ads to appear. And that means that within that, I guess that's a 50 or 100 mile radius, that's where your ads appear, and not outside, if that's what you want. And it depends on your objectives and the specifics of the program. If you're running a rare disease trial, arguably you might want to make it broader. And this is certainly what we've done with you guys at the AKU Society. So if, for example, a trial is running in countries X, Y, Z, you might actually want your ads to appear in neighbouring countries as well, because if there are no approved treatments and no alternative therapies, then people might be willing to travel from one country to another, provided that they've got the right support. And I'm less an expert than Chris on this, but you've got to provide support around logistics and getting people from one country to another. Okay, and that's for me. That's getting the geo-targeting right is a really important approach, and getting it right is really digitally savvy. Okay, so this is a bit about, and you guys will recognise this, Ollie. This is an example of going back to the funnel I showed at the beginning. This is another example of how you can use that funnel to great effect. And this is the website of the AKU Society, which is a patient group devoted to the condition alkaptonuria. And you guys have been driving a clinical trial, phase 3 clinical trial in Europe called Findacure in 3 countries: UK, France, Slovakia. And a bit like we had on the Alzheimer's website, also on this site in the top right, you've got a very prominent ad which clicks through to a website which is all about this clinical trial, Findacure. And you guys have been doing this before we got involved, but we got involved possibly a couple of years ago, and now we're involved running the Google AdWords campaign. So what we knew was that there was healthy interest in the symptoms of this condition, alkaptonuria. So we used the tool, which I showed you earlier, the Google AdWords keyword tool, and some of the key symptoms Cool. Pardon me. And some of the key symptoms of alkaptonuria include things like black urine and black spots in the eyes. And so what we did was we created a Google AdWords campaign so that people who search those keywords would then see an ad which would direct them into this trial. We ran this for, we've been running it for some time, but within 6 months we'd attracted, I think it was 500,000 page views of the ad, which is quite staggering considering that it's a condition that only has 90 million cases in the UK and less than 1,000 worldwide. And this is an example of some of the ads that we produced. So in the top left, clinical trial for AKU. This was targeted at people who had been diagnosed with the condition, so they knew that they had it. And the keywords were things like AKU clinical trial or developing clinical trial. It's people who actually knew that term already. And in the rest of this screenshot, you can see the translated versions of ads which were targeted at people who didn't know that they had alkaptonuria, and all they were doing was googling the symptoms. So on the top right, you've got manchas negras los ojos, which I think means black spots in the eyes. So people who actually don't know what condition they have, but are experiencing the symptoms, and Google those symptoms, then see that on the search results, and then they click on that and it directs them to back to this page, which is where you're funneling people towards the clinical trial. Okay. Just a quick word on listening tools, which I think is quite exciting. And you might have heard of social listening, and it's something that companies in all kinds of industries are doing to better understand how their brands or their products are perceived and being spoken about in the community. To date, it's not been used to much degree in clinical research or to identify patients, but I'm actually quite enthusiastic that there is potential. And this is the example of a tool called Hootsuite, and it's a free tool. And I created an account just a few weeks ago. And going back to the example of cystic fibrosis again, what I've got here is tweets on Twitter from people who appear to have a close personal connection to cystic fibrosis. So if you're interested in identifying either cystic fibrosis patients or their families or carers or friends, that might be a way of doing it. And you can actually use the tool, which is completely free. And you can actually see how this condition is being spoken about, who's speaking about it. So over time, you might want to build a database of people who you could then reach out to with your communications about the initiatives that you're doing. Okay, so the future, and I'll wrap up quickly. So tools like Google AdWords, Hootsuite, MoodRaker, there are many, and if you're interested, I can give you some names. They're very sophisticated already, they're freely available, and they're only going to become more valuable over time. I would say that used in the right way, these tools can really empower patients and patient groups, even those that are local and relatively small, and can empower them to reach patients in diverse corners of the globe. And I think that patients can really participate in this area as driving forces of change. And those that are really early movers can actually educate other people to do that. So I'm hoping that through half-hour talk that I've whet your appetite and encouraged you to be part of that. There are some resources here if you're interested in online tools. The top 3 are some kind of training courses that me and my team have been on, and I recommend those. And likewise, in the bottom half, there are some online resources, some